This is the France 24 debate. We've been asking our panel, should the West be returning to Iraq? We've been putting the question to Oliver Miles, former British ambassador to Libya, who joins us from Oxford. In London, Olivier Guitta, Director of Research at the Henry Jackson Society. And here in the studios, Julian Howarth, Professor of International Relations at Yale University and Iraqi writer and analyst Abdelrahman Dara Suleiman. Welcome back to all you gentlemen. And we were talking about whether or not the U.S. should return. It should be saying whether the West should return. Now, in remarks last week, the German Chancellor, Angela Merkel, firmly putting the ball in Washington's court, saying that effectively this is first and foremost up to the United States.
Naturally, the Americans have a very special responsibility as far as Iraq is concerned, as one can tell from the reactions of the United States at the moment. What Germany can do beyond any military engagement is to try to accompany the political process. But the United States' special responsibility is already being exercised by President Barack Obama.
Olivier Guitta, do you agree that this is Washington's special responsibility?
It's everybody's responsibility at this point because I disagree with the previous comment regarding the British jihadist or the European jihadist. We have now a case in Europe of a French jihadist joining the ranks of ISIS, coming back to Europe and committing a terror attack in the Jewish Museum in Brussels and killing 4 people. So that is the proof in the pudding. It is true that it's going to be very difficult at this point because we let the situation rot, and that the divide and the hatred between the communities is such that even a political agreement is not going to work. If you go back to the tribes and say it's in your own interest to get rid of ISIS, I don't know if they'll buy it today because they felt betrayed by the West back in 2008 when President Obama was elected and campaigned on withdrawal from Iraq. They thought that the Americans were going to stay another 10 years.
So what do you think when you hear Angela Merkel saying that it's up to the U.S. to lead the charge?
She's basically washing her hands, but remember the Germans have a culture of not intervening military in any country. But Europe is one way or another, more through Syria, going to be impacted by what's happening.
Julian Howarth.
I think that what Angela Merkel was essentially saying, well, apart from washing her hands of it, was intervening in an internal debate in the United States, which is the debate between is Bush responsible for this mess or is Obama responsible for this mess? And there are a lot of people in the United States who are blaming Obama for not having stayed in, for not having negotiated what's called a Status of Forces agreement in 2011 and left 25,000 American troops in there. This is a very intense debate in the United States. Personally, I think it's totally absurd to blame Obama, who never wanted to be involved in this in the first place and who actually went through the motions of negotiating this thing. It was non-negotiable. There was nothing he could do. So I think that's part of the discussion here, that America sort of feels in some way that it has to pick up the tab. I don't think it'll work. I don't think this sort of intervention in this sort of volatile situation will do anything other than make matters worse.
All right. One reaction that agrees with Olivier Guitta. The West should intervene in Syria rather than in Iraq. That's one comment we're getting on Twitter. Abdelrahman Dara Suleiman, who do Iraqis turn to? Is it the Americans? Is it the Iranians? Who do they want to help them out?
Well, in fact...
or could it be the Europeans, excuse me?
Yeah. I think the situation in Iraq today, it's extremely dangerous. And the situations push us all as Iraqis, it's our destiny, to the unknown, to the abyss. And I think it's the responsibility of the international community, United States, the regional countries, and before all of these elements, the Iraqi local responsibility if I can, just if you permit me,
No, but you explained to us how the Iraqis have a huge burden of responsibility for making this mess. But when you say just now the international community, what do you mean?
I mean the fighting against terrorism. It's first of all, it's a human duty, a human responsibility, and beside of that, it's the terrorism. It's threatening everyone, every country. If it's today in Middle East, might be tomorrow. In the near future, it will be in Europe. It's not very far. Because of that, it's a big battle against powers which coming from past, which wishing and like to govern us by the law of past. That it's a human duty to put the Europe and other countries beside Europe, United States, also to be against the terrorism.
All right, a human duty, and yet when you look at the latest opinion polls, and there's one published this Tuesday by the New York Times, it shows a sudden and sharp dip in Barack Obama's approval rating ever since he said that the U.S. was looking into ways of supporting the government in Iraq, unfavorable ratings for his handling of Iraq. But at the same time, the same poll showing a slim majority, 51% backing his decision to send military advisors, 56% in favor of the use of drones in Iraq to 38 against. How do you interpret this poll, Julian Howard?
Well, Americans do feel some sort of residual responsibility for the situation that's been going on there. So sending in advisors is not something that the public get terribly excited about. And I don't think that the American public has yet fully grasped the extent to which the use of drones in Pakistan, in Yemen, in Somalia, in various places, is very controversial, and both militarily and in terms of strategy. So it's something that they think is very easy, and it doesn't cost very much, and it's pretty effective. That's the way it's been sold. But in reality, if you look at the whole history of the use of drones, it's a very mixed bag. So I think the results are, as in many of these things, to a large extent, a function of the extent to which the people being asked the questions understand the problem.
Olivier Guitta, do you fear that what's going to happen in the end is the perception in the Arab world is the United States is going in using drones to support Shiites against Sunnis?
Yes, exactly. That's one of the points, because, look, if you study the rationale, the U.S. had a red line not to cross using chemical weapons in Syria. Last August, Assad used on his own people chemical weapons, and Obama didn't intervene. And that was the tipping point when jihadist websites were recruiting people in drove in Europe to go and say, look, the West doesn't want to save your Muslim brothers. You have to go there and defend us. If Obama intervenes today, you are right. People will have the divide and say, okay, he took the side of the Shia. When it was time to save Sunnis being killed by Assad, he didn't do anything.
All right, old arguments, as we're saying, resurfacing. Arguments date back, as Julian was saying, to 2003 and George W. Bush's decision to invade Iraq and topple Saddam Hussein. There was a cartoon to that effect by Tom Tolles in the Washington Post this Tuesday. There have been op-ed pieces as well. There you can see it, where you see Democrats and Republicans saying, I told you so, on both sides of the divide. There have been op-ed pieces by former Vice President Dick Cheney, interviews and articles by the former UK Prime Minister Tony Blair in Monday's Financial Times. Blair wrote, the fundamental challenge today arises not from the decisions of 2003 or those of 2014. It is the challenge of Islamist extremism, and it is global. It is a challenge we cannot avoid. Its outcome will dramatically affect our own security. We may be war-weary and want to disengage, but the people we are fighting do not share that weariness. Oliver Miles, you are one of several former UK ambassadors who have signed a letter calling for Blair to no longer be the Middle East envoy from the quartet.
That's right, yes. and part of that is to do with the Iraq story. I think that when Mrs. Merkel, you quoted her just now, had the clip from her just now, saying that this is America's business, surely one of the things that she had in mind was America was responsible for the war in 2003, along with Britain, along with Tony Blair and others, including, I think, Germany was involved at the time. France was the one that stood out against it. The trouble with that war, apart from all the things that have been said about the weapons of mass destruction, the use of intelligence, misleading the public and so on, but the fundamental problem to my mind was that America and Britain and the others who went into that war didn't give any serious thought to what their war aims were. There was no planning for the peace, or rather there was planning. A lot of planning was done in the State Department, a lot of planning was done in London, and I'm sure in other capitals, but it was never used. Bush and Blair took the view that Iraq would sort itself out. All we have to do is get rid of Saddam. He's an evil man. End of story. And that is one of the fundamental problems of Iraq now, that we are living with the aftermath of all that failure to plan for a post-war settlement.
But Blair writes in that piece that was then, this is now, and the problem now is jihadists.
Yes, that's right. But if I can quote what I heard Rory Stewart, one of our young politicians who knows quite a bit about the Middle East, say the other day, before we discuss what we should do in Iraq, we should discuss what we can do in Iraq. We do not have the tools to do the job. So before we get into a state of moral enthusiasm for some kind of action at all costs, let's work out what action is there that we could take that would make things better. And at the moment, I would say the best thing we can do is wait for the Iraqis to sort themselves out.
All right. Oliver Miles, do you agree?
That was me talking.
I'm sorry, Oliver Miles, excuse me. Olivier Guitta. Beg your pardon.
Look, a couple of things. At this point, really, what needs to be done is to either decide that the country is going to be broken up in three pieces and that living together is not going to happen, or that we're going to sit on the sidelines and see a civil war unfold. But if that's the case, then we have the larger geopolitical picture. Because as of now, the most worried person is President Assad of Syria, because Iran and Hezbollah are moving out of Syria to go into Iraq. And I can tell you that, we have not been focusing on that, but that the Free Syrian Army and other groups are going to use that to their advantage. And you could have, in the next few weeks or few months, a big change in the military powers going into Syria. And at the same time, Iran is accusing Saudi Arabia of supporting ISIS. So you could make the case that in light of Iran's support for terrorist groups in the world, they could attack Saudi interests in Lebanon, in Saudi itself. But at the same time, ISIS had made a case that Iran is next. And if ISIS is able to pull off terror attacks in Tehran, that will be the game changer.
The old Shia-Sunni divide certainly being stoked by these extremists. Old colonial boundaries drawn by the French and the British after World War I put to the test, as illustrated by the cover of this week's edition of Time magazine, which wonders if it's the end of Iraq. And it also, again, there's the surprise, and we're pleased to welcome at this point James Creedon, our Media Watch editor. James, the surprise over how resilient and resourceful ISIS has been. There was a report last week about how they even put out brochures every year for potential donors with targets of how many killings they have to do.
It's a very well-organized campaign online, Francois, and they appear to have a propaganda department with access to high-definition camera equipment, which is then recording footage, for example, even a feature-length propaganda movie called The Clanging of Swords, an app that you can download for your phone, available on Google Play, known as Dawn of Glad Tidings, so you can get live updates on your iPhone as to the progress of ISIS forces. It's a very, very well organised campaign. Just a couple of quotes from media. The advance of an army used to be marked by war drums. Now it's marked by a volley of tweets. That's one quote from The Atlantic. And a similar one from The Guardian. In wars gone by, advancing armies smoothed their path with missiles. ISIS does it with tweets and a movie. Now, is that overstating it? Perhaps a little bit, dramatising it for media purposes. But if you look online, what you see is very organised campaigns to get those messages and those tweets out there. For example, the use of hashtags such as Sykes-Picot over.
Tell us what Sykes-Picot is.
All right, well, that's the agreement between the British and French foreign minister going back when the borders were determined between a lot of these countries such as Iraq and Syria. And what that hashtag is essentially grouping together is messages saying we are going to redraw the map of the region again. And if you have a look under the hashtag, when you type it into Twitter, you see all sorts of maps coming up, pictures of bulldozers showing, I suppose, what is meant to be a former border. Wow, Sykes-Picot over is trending after only a century of bloodshed, says one commentator online. And indeed, when those comments are picked up, Francois, by accounts such as this one on Twitter called Active Hashtags, that is a Twitter account in Arabic which picks up on the most talked about hashtags, and then that gives it another amplification. For example, if this Twitter account picks up on a trend, it'll get an average of 72 retweets per minute. So there's a sort of a snowball effect whereby ISIS really is managing to use social media very, very well as a propaganda tool. Now, what's surprising about this, just one final point, is that despite the fact that the Iraqi government has cracked down on Twitter, cracked down on Facebook, they have not, for some bizarre reason, blocked 7 websites that are maintained by ISIS or indeed support its bloody rampage. So there seems to be a rather patchy effort by the Iraqi government to clamp down on this propaganda effort via social media. So successful in terms of silencing social media websites, but not other websites that are funded or supporting ISIS.
So Julian Howarth, here is an organization that not only raided the central bank in Iraq's second city a few days ago, but also is able to appeal to donors, put out publicity campaigns quite easily. What are your thoughts on this?
Well, this is the way these sorts of organizations operate. And we see the same thing going on in Afghanistan. We saw this happening actually in Anbar province during the war of 2003, 2000, whenever it ended, is that people occupy the territory and they then impose a sort of administration. They set up taxes, they set up courts, they run the place properly. And that's exactly what's happening here. And as I say, that's what's happening in Afghanistan. I think that they're trying to demonstrate that they are effective at governance, much more effective than Maliki here or than Karzai in Afghanistan or than whoever was running the show back in 2003.
Just one final question on this, James. Were you surprised by the tone of the messages?
Well, I think what's most surprising really is the way in which they have generated support. I mean, they're getting their message out there, and it's coming back in terms of just a couple of more items to show you in that regard. Support from Rome, and you see people showing their support for this ISIS campaign. So what they're reaping, they are sowing in some regards. From Australia, you have all sorts of images like that. But regarding the tone, Francois, some of the imagery is extremely violent. It is extremely provocative. And very much, banging the drums of war.
All right, James Queedon, many thanks for that. Olivier Guitta, I know this is something that you focus on in your work. The people who go, the Europeans who go for ISIS, they come back and are they heroes when they come back to their neighborhoods?
I mean, it's too early to tell. A couple of things that you have to keep in mind is that now ISIS is really focused on the Levant and Iraq. I don't think that at the moment they're going to have, a huge campaign to tell the European members of their troops to go back to Europe and strike at Europe. It's a different animal when we talk about al-Nusra that is linked to al-Qaeda that will have much more of an international view. But ISIS at the moment as you've seen, is very sophisticated, very focused on getting one country at a time, and they're not going to spend more time to get back at the West. Al-Nusra is another story at this point.
And that brings us back to the question that Oliver Miles was asking a while ago, and I'll put it to you, Olivier Guitta. It's not what the West should do, but what the West can do. What can the West do?
I mean, we're going to have to decide if we're ready to have a new Yugoslavia whereby it's a Balkanization of Iraq. Are we ready to have 3 countries? Or are we ready to have a civil war? Those are all bad options, I would put to you. But because we didn't intervene in Syria, we think that this is not going to touch us. But look, if it happens in Iraq and then it touches onto Lebanon and Iran, and this will all affect us more quickly than anyone could have predicted last summer.
Oliver Miles, what's the least worst scenario at this point?
I think that there's a possibility that the Sunni part of Iraq, which is now run by ISIS, will find a modus vivendi, that they'll find a way of working without necessarily rising up against their new rulers, that the more extreme positions will turn out to be temporary. We can't be sure. Nobody knows. Nobody knows. Just to comment for a moment on the social media tweeting and all that, we shouldn't be surprised that the Iraqis are good at that. My impression throughout my life, knocking around the Middle East and working in various different countries, has been that the standard of education and ability in Iraq was higher than, I think, any other Arab country. So you're talking now about a lot of people who were in the Iraqi army. They were sent home after the American-British invasion in 2003. If you remember, they were simply told that they were no longer needed, and so they took their weapons and went home. And now they are forming again and becoming a force in the land. And I'm not surprised that they're able to use all the modern techniques that are available to them.
Abdelrahman Dar Suleiman, at the end of the day, will Iraq remain one unified nation?
Well, I think it's the worst scenario which can arrive to Iraq. But by the way, it's a military intervention. If I speak about it as a medium and long term, it will not be the best solution for Iraq. I think it can treat for short time, for short term, or temporary, dealing with the
but the problems will then come back.
With the danger of terrorism, or with this scenario.
So can Iraq preserve itself as one nation? Can Iraq stay whole?
I think yes. If Occident, if the West and United States helping Iraqi people to forming a new government, a national, a real national government. I mean, founded on a real partnership, that it's have a real program, a clear vision, working as one team together. That means returning back to the idea, to the concept of nationalism. That's we have one identity as Iraqis.
All right, Julian Howard.
With the greatest respect, that has never really been the case. And I think if you go through the whole history of Iraq as a polity, as a country, you'll see again that it was founded in the first place because this is a very volatile piece of real estate in the middle of the Middle East. And the powers did not want it to be a void. So you create this thing in order to build a buffer between Iran and Turkey and the Levant. We saw at the end of the war to evacuate Saddam Hussein from Kuwait, that the Americans did not go up to Baghdad and create a void deliberately because they recognize that you need to have a strong man to hold this thing together. We're back there again now, but the reality is that the 3 parts of Iraq have never meshed, and they have always had enormous difficulty in working together. And I think that the situation now is one where it's almost impossible to imagine making that work now.
All right, we'll have to see how it plays out. And of course, we'll watch not only events inside Iraq, but how the international community plays out. We didn't have time to talk about it, but as the price of oil starts to rise as well, it's hit 9 months highs. I want to thank you, Jolyon Howarth, for being with us. I want to thank Abdelrahman Dara Suleiman, and I want to thank both Oliver and Oliver Miles, for being with us in Oxford, and Olivier Guitta in London. Thank you for joining us here. This is the France 24 debate.